My name is Dr. Ian Storch. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist and osteopathic physician, and you are listening to Do or Do Not. If you're interested in joining our team or have suggestions or comments, please contact us at doordonotpodcast.com. Share our link with your friends and like us on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Akito Nickel. I'm a fourth-year student at the NYIT College of Osteopathic Medicine, and you are listening to the Do or Do Not podcast. In this episode of Do or Do Not, we will interview Dr. Andrea Amalfitano, the current dean of the Michigan State University College of Osteopathic Medicine. Dr. Amalfitano graduated from the DO PhD program at MSUCOM with doctoral degrees in microbiology and osteopathic medicine, after which he completed a pediatrics residency at the prestigious Mayo Clinic and a fellowship at the University of Michigan Department of Human Genetics. In addition to serving as dean of MSUCOM, Dr. Amalfitano is also the Osteopathic Heritage Foundation Endowed Professor of Pediatrics, Microbiology, and Molecular Genetics, as well as director of the MSU Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. Needless to say, it is a great privilege to talk to Dr. Amalfitano about his experiences as an osteopathic physician, researcher, and leader. We believe his perspectives will be tremendously valuable for pre-meds, medical students, and physicians alike. Without further ado, here is Dr. Amalfitano. Well, Dr. Amalfitano, thank you so much for joining us today on the Do or Do Not podcast.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really my honor. Really enjoy the ability to be able to share some experiences from one of thousands of DOs around the country, and hopefully that can assist others as they find their path in this great career.
Great. Well, we appreciate it. So I guess without further ado, I know that you have different roles as a physician, a professor, a researcher, and a leader. But what does a normal workday look like for you? Start us in the morning and take us through your roles and responsibilities. And if you have different types of days, feel free to elaborate.
That's a moving target. And it's been one my entire career, which I think is not a bad thing. In fact, I think that I didn't even realize in entering the osteopathic profession the multiple opportunities that are available to one that are all equally important and gratifying. And those roles have changed over time for me as well, which again, I think, and I tell future students to think about that. As you go through life and go through your career, your goals, your needs, your wants, your desires, what you're comfortable with, what your pursuits are, may vary over time. And there's very few professions out there that allow you to sort of navigate that over time and still find that you haven't hit a brick wall, that you haven't burned a bridge, and now you're at a place where you're not entirely happy. And so my career is focused on a number of avenues, as you alluded to. Currently, I'm a dean of a medical school, what I would like to think is the best medical school in the country. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm also an alumni, so I think I'm allowed that a little bit. As dean of the school, I have a lot of administrative oversight and responsibility to just make sure that the college, the med school, is on stable ground, financially and or otherwise, that we are able to meet the needs of our students primarily. That's our goal, that's in our plan, and constantly working on ways to make sure that the education of tomorrow's osteopathic physician is met, and not only met, but exceeded, so that students can feel confident when they graduate from our college that they're going to be well equipped to achieve that career that they had dreamed about all their lives. And so I have a lot of meetings, lots of folks. We have a large college, with 1,300 students about. We have about 500 faculty and staff across 3 campuses in the state of Michigan, multiple deans, multiple chairpersons and units, as well as the greater university. We're part of a large university, nearly 50,000 students at Michigan State. of which most are on our East Lansing campus here. And that includes about 13 or 14 other colleges and units. And so I'm sort of the bridge between the College of Osteopathic Medicine and all the other colleges and research capacities of the greater university. So that's another slew of meetings and leaders that I interact with, and we've got some great folks around. That's part of the fun of the job, is getting to be able to interact, with the engineering college, the College of Business, the College of Law, social sciences, natural sciences. We really get to interact across a wide breadth. Now, I am a clinical geneticist. That's my training. I did training in medicine and pediatrics residency, and then specialized in genetics. I've sort of curtailed my clinical activities as I became dean, because I had been kind of winding that down anyway, but that primarily involves seeing families affected by any number of genetic disorders. And I tend to think of myself as the family practitioner to the conditions out there. Genetic conditions tend to be rare. And that means a continuity of care over time for individuals that really may not have any other point of contact with the medical profession, because many of the conditions I deal with and they deal with are rare. There aren't very many geneticists in the country. I think I'm the only one of 3 DO board certified geneticists actually nationally. And so I want to feel comfortable that I can maintain that level of continuity of care. So I've had sort of back off on that a little bit. I still conduct research. I am a product of the MSU DO PhD program. I still have a laboratory that sort of keeps me going. We have a laboratory on campus in which we train graduate students, DO PhD students. I've had 5 now come through our lab, and they're going to go out and repeat the process. We study a number of disorders, genetic and acquired, develop genetic technologies in that lab. Been doing that for a long time as well. And so any one day can be different, but primarily I'd say I've been focused on the college's oversight as dean, and even interacting with all the other deans of all the other osteopathic medical schools, by the way, 40 of them now. And great group. It's been a really great treat to be able to interact with the other deans. We can commiserate on what we deal with on a day-to-day basis, but the real beauty of it is that we are seeing the profession growing steadily, accomplishing great things. And I think what we're all trying to do is place us in best position to allow that to continue. There's no doubt about it that we're the fastest growing profession in the country. And a lot of that is based upon the success of the medical schools. And so we really feel vested in that success. So it's a long answer, but like I said, I guess my quote is, there's never a dull moment. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, it sure doesn't sound like there's a dull moment, that's for sure. Every day is varied. So let's wind the clock back a little bit and talk about, when did you first decide to pursue a career in medicine? What influenced your decision?
Actually goes way back. I literally, I'll just share this with you. My father and mother both came from Italy. I'm a first generation sort of individual. And let me just say, we didn't have the best economic status. My father had great difficulty finding employment, and he was a chef, if you will. And one day, as it occurs, he had lost his job, and we were facing yet again another crisis. And this is like I'm in 5th grade, and he said something to me like, why don't you be a doctor? You don't get fired. And I was like, okay, silly, but it stuck with me. And obviously he was sort of thinking of it in more superficial terms, but and you can get fired as a doctor, by the way. But it said for me, yes, that would be a laudable profession. And luckily I had some brain skills that as I learned more and more, it got reinforced for me. I had experiences, I did volunteer experiences. I tried to immerse myself in all kinds of ways and look at other things too. And in the end, I always felt like this is a worthy way to pursue my life and hopefully contribute in some tangible manner that might leave something for somebody. So it started very early on, and I just kept pursuing that. Through undergraduate, I went to Michigan State, pursued a degree in microbiology, and that's where I had been interested in research, but that really kind of fueled it as part of that department. And then I became aware of the dual degree program and realized, hey, research is really interesting because you can have, I mean, it's fulfilling as a physician, right? You see a patient, you interact, you can do something, you can either preserve health or treat an illness. And that is, a lot of people don't get that experience, period, right? It's very fulfilling.
Absolutely.
What research allows you to do is move beyond your day-to-day patient interactions and maybe contribute some knowledge that a physician on the other side of the planet can take advantage of so that they can take that knowledge to a family or an individual and benefit them. And that intrigued me, in particular, pursuing the latest in genetic technologies to try and foster new treatments for very devastating conditions. So that's how I got kind of into the whole dual degree program, found out about it here at MSU and joined up. And fortuitously, it was with the Osteopathic Medical School. And I got to learn about osteopathic medicine simultaneous with that, which really resonated with me. Principles of holistic approaches to patient care and preventative medicine, and seemed obvious to me, and to hear it articulated. I hadn't been exposed to osteopathic medicine before I came, at least at any tangible sense. But luckily, all that came together for me, and I was able to enter the medical school here.
That's a fantastic story. But in that journey, were there any particular people that were special to you? Were there any mentors who stood out, whether in research or in medicine?
Yeah, I had several undergrad professors in the microbiology department. Dr. Velser, I still remember, he was a veterinarian, actually, a DVM PhD, and I worked in his lab, and he was doing similar ailments, but had a similar kind of trajectory, and so I saw how he was pursuing his career and also pursuing cutting-edge virus research. Others, physicians in the area that I worked with, pediatrics in particular, I always thought that, wow, these people are always in a good mood. I don't understand it, but and that helped me understand maybe clinically where I was heading. Mentors in my PhD program, Dr. Fluke, she was a virologist. Dr. McCormick, Justin McCormick, who ran the DO PhD program for many, many years, was quite the mentor for me and really kept me aligned and kept me and our entire group aware of what the possibilities would be, despite this slog going through, not only a DO med school curriculum, but also a PhD. So lots of support along the way that helped me during the travails of going through both a DO curriculum and a PhD curriculum. Kind of help keep your eye on the prize. It always seemed so far away, so far away. Was it worth it? All those sorts of things. And they kept making it clear to me that the benefits were going to be wonderful, and I trusted them, and they were right.
So have you always had an interest in pediatrics specifically, or did you explore a lot of different fields and come to that conclusion?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not initially. I had, some exposures, but really reasons we choose why we do what we do in medicine, a lot of times it's just like you were just asking. Sometimes a pivotal mentor that you encounter, you're like, I want to be like that individual. She's fantastic, what she does, or he's great at what he does, and I would love to be like that. Or there's a pivotal experience, an encounter or something like that. That's why we do all the rotations, all the clerkships. It's not only just to learn medicine, it's also to get you to understand what you're comfortable with and what fields you want to go in. And sometimes you forget about that. Because my PhD research was in studying a cancer-causing virus, I was thinking about going into internal medicine and adult oncology, specializing in that. And I actually did my internship at the time was a rotating internal medicine internship, focused on, doing multiple rotations in adult oncology. It was during that time that I kind of realized, it's a little difficult situation when you're encountering individuals with solid tumors that really have no real good outcome. At the time, we've made progress, but still, it's very difficult for me. I did some pediatric rotations at the same time, and I realized that pediatric hemonc was offering a bit more to me, especially in my research sort of goals. I then did a pediatric residency at that point. It literally was sort of encountering the clinical practice, seeing what it was, and really coming to grips with, I think I'm more comfortable in the pediatric realm.
When it came to your pediatrics residency, what factors did you consider when choosing your residency program? And by the way, could you please tell the audience where you did your residency?
Yeah, I did it at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. It's like a hospital in the middle of this cornfield out there. It's quite the place. It was a great place. Actually, as far as I'm concerned, it's the greatest hospital on the planet. I was kind of, again, zeroed in on the long-term sort of goal, and my goal was likely to specialize, right? To do a fellowship, to not to minimize, but I wasn't going to be a general pediatrician because I still wanted to conduct research and participate, either clinical trials or basic research. And so I looked at pediatric programs that would put me in a position to best not only understand general pediatrics, but get me in position for that ultimate fellowship. And I was zeroed in on hematology oncology at the time as a potential target for fellowship. And so I looked at pediatric residencies that allowed for that. And there were several, and the one at Mayo in particular really integrated the two right out of the gate. Now they have even better residency programs where you can sort of simultaneously get accepted to both the general and the specialty pediatrics or medicine or OB-GYN or a number of others, surgical too. But at the time, those were limited for me. So I did the pediatric residency at Mayo because of the heavy involvement and exposure to the hemonc practice there.
And then ultimately, like you said, you became a clinical geneticist. What did the path to get to that position look like?
It was literally, again, one of these, I tell the students here sometimes during orientation, actually, again, during pediatrics, right, you're doing your general rotations, your ICU, your NICU, and then you get a couple of electives, in there. And so at the time, clinical genetics had just become a board certified specialty. It had been practiced, but it became an ABMS certified specialty. And there were several, Mayo had quite a number of geneticists and quite the investment in genetics, really impressive. And so I did a rotation with the pediatric genetics group. And literally the first patient I saw, I can still remember. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, these are the type of cases that I read about, that I go back when I'm absolutely exhausted, been on call for 5 days and whatever. I'm still interested in reading up and trying to understand this. And here they are coming in hour after hour, each case. And I thought to myself, this is literally what I want to do. Now, simultaneous with that, I had experiences with the pediatric hemonc clinics. And to me, and in fact, several of my mentors at the time said, if you really want to pursue a research career of substance, to have the time to do what I was thinking about doing. And what I was thinking about doing was gene therapy research. Basically trying to genetically engineer, viruses to turn them into medicine. And they said the time that you need for that, you can't be a full-time clinician and hope to achieve that. You might, but it's going to be difficult. Now, genetics, on the other hand, clinical practice is such that it's an expectation that you would do a sizable part of your time doing research. And so those two things together came to me. Again, this is like what I said, it's the beauty of this entire profession that you can kind of zig and zag through the years and figure out where ultimately your place is. And this is what happened for me. So I literally, that day or the day after, I'd already signed up for the Peds Hemonc Fellowship, and I kind of said quietly, I'm going to decline that. I literally called up genetics fellowships and ended up at the University of Michigan and did my genetics specialty training there.
That's fantastic. And I assume that then, led to your position at MSU?
Well, actually, I was at Michigan for 3 years. One, it's a clinical genetics practice, and I got to learn as much as I could about that practice. And then a big chunk of it was actually dedicated to research. And I started conducting research on genetic diseases, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a couple others. And then so once you're done with fellowship, it's like, okay, got to get a job, right? Time to. In fact, during this whole time, my father, who I told you about earlier, right? Like, when are you gonna get done? You go to med school, you got to get a PhD, you're going to do an internship. I'm sure many students on the call here are listening can feel, your family's like, well, how long is it going to take? Residency, fellowship. So finally you go out and get a job. And geneticists, they're few and far between, and those positions don't open up. So every year, because if you're traditionally at an academic medical center, you're not able to kind of hang a shingle out in, a rural area and be able to run what I was hoping to accomplish. So anyway, there were a few opportunities. I ended up going to Duke University. So I was at Duke University Medical Center. I was on staff there as an assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics, the Division of Medical Genetics there. And I was actually on staff, was tenured at Duke, stayed there about 10 years. And then I came back to Michigan State on faculty. I think I was only one of three, maybe at one time I was the only DO at Duke University Medical Center. And it was a great place. They love basketball there too. But it was great, learned a lot, got my research career kind of on track, was able to get NIH grants at that time, established my laboratory, got involved in clinical trials, actually participated in the first in man use of a new drug that ultimately, as a result of that study, was studied in a couple of subsequent clinical trials and was approved for use as the first treatment for a muscular dystrophy that's called Pompe disease. And so it's kind of neat because I'm able to prescribe that. The initial use of that, I still remember the first patient that we, hung the IV bag for, and then subsequently I'm writing prescriptions for this unique enzyme therapy for Pompe disease. So that's kind of the cool stuff, again, that we get to get involved in our career. And it's one not a lot of people really get to experience that feeling of, wow, I was on the front end of that. And now, and it gets back to my point earlier, now, there's thousands of patients being treated, tens of thousands being treated worldwide by physicians using that same prescription for that drug that we initially tested. And that's the impact of research, right? It's beyond the cases that I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis. And I know out there that there's individuals that are hopefully being positively affected by those efforts way back when.
I mean, it must be so incredible to see the fruits of your research being used all over the world, especially because I think at times people see research as something that might not necessarily result in a workable product for a long period of time.
It's a great point you bring, and I'm going to jump on it because I agree. And in fact, a lot of research, you're not wrong. A lot of research, you'll wonder, is this ever going to see the light of day, right? Is this ever going to be impactful? And in fact, and I tell our DO PhD students this as well as anybody who wants to listen, but my medical training, my DO medical training in particular, I fully feel that it allows me versus others who may not have had that experience to really look at a problem, a need, a medical need, and look at it in a new way, in a holistic way, and look at it in a manner that allows me to see the forest, for the trees, that you don't get so reductionist. Part of osteopathic medicine is we don't want to be reductionist, right? We want to be holistic. Absolutely. We don't want to turn people into a symptom or a problem and, take care of them and send them a script and send them on their way and good luck, And same thing with research problems. You can reduce things down to the molecular, the atomic level, and I can do that. And you ended up with, it's a great publication. Never, besides a rat, it may, that's about it. And so that's actually forced my hand to study things in the lab that might not be the things that are resonating out there in the world, because I know from my medical training that these things may be interesting in the laboratory, but they're never going to see the light of day of a human. And so I tend to zero in on those things that are ultimately rapidly translatable, translatable from the bench to the bedside, if you will. So the enzyme therapy was one of those things that maybe was not cutting edge, but it made it. It made it through the gauntlet, got FDA approved. Another example of that is I've been studying a virus called an adenovirus and genetically engineering that virus to turn it into a therapeutic vaccine for cancer. This virus is not it's a, I don't know what the exact word, it's been maligned, it's been discounted, it's been negated, whatever, for all kinds of reasons. But I knew in my mind that if I could get this thing correct, that it would be applicable to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people in a reasonable period of time. So we've actually developed this. A company has taken off, and I've got a little bottle of it back here, a little imitation bottle of it. But now this therapeutic cancer vaccine is in 28 human clinical trials attempting to treat pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, gastric. These are, remember those difficult cancers that I told you about that I was finding trouble becoming a clinician? Well, it came full circle for me, and now developing research to actually go after that. Even though I didn't become an adult oncologist, I'm still playing in the field from the research side. So I think that's an important element of research, and I think med students can find projects that can make them feel like, hey, this is something that is going to resonate. And clinical research is fantastic, and quality assurance, quality improvement projects should not be discounted. Those are the things that have immediate impact and will benefit many people. So I'm just not locked into your basic bench type of research as being the be-all to end-all. It's one of many ways that you can make some really important, and clinical trials are some of the most successful in improving the health of folks.
I think there's a lot of wisdom that not just DO PhD, but MD PhD and just also pure PhD research students can actually draw from that. I think that was a really, really great insight to hear. So now that we've heard a lot about your research activities, I just kind of want to go back to what we were talking about earlier. So you were at Duke University. What ultimately brought you back to MSU?
Again, a confluence of items, but two or three that I'll think of, I can think of real quick. One is that there was a change nationally. I can't remember the exact year, but relative to some problems that had occurred in clinical trials in which an investigator, like myself or whatever, a researcher, let's say you invent something, right? And you patent it, which you should, because it'll never see the light of day unless you patent it, because no one's going to invest in something that doesn't have some protection. That's another story for another day. So by virtue of you inventing it, you're automatically, have intellectual property rights to a potential invention, right? That eventually, if it did generate some money or revenue, that you might receive some royalties. Now, imagine if you're a patient and I come to you and say, hey, I got this whiz-bang virus that I think was going to treat your condition. And oh, by the way, if it works, I might stand to get some royalties down the road. That puts you in a potential conflict of interest, right, as a physician. And in fact, there were several trials in which that occurred, in which the patients were not adequately, the trial participants were not adequately informed that the trial leaders had a conflict of financial interest. And unfortunately, several of those trial participants had a bad outcome. It's like, well, if I would have known that, I might not have participated, because how do I know that this treatment is just being, might have not my best interests, right? And that's fair, no doubt about it. Now, there is a way to do it in which you inform the trial participant, look, oh, by the way, Dr. Amalfitano owns the patent on this and could potentially down the road see some royalties from your participation and the results of this study. If you do that appropriately, and you can do that in an IRB approved consent form, then someone can make a decision. Yeah, I still want to participate, or no, I'm going to pass on that one. But you got to make sure it's done right. Well, anyway, as a result of that, several institutions basically banned a physician, an investigator, from participating in those initial clinical trials in which they potentially could have financial gain down the road, because by virtue of they're an inventor. And Duke was one of those institutions that did that. Now, when that first happened, I was kind of dismayed. I was like, what? I just trained, DO, PhD. I spent my entire career attempting to put myself in position that I can actually take something from the bench and then go and do the clinical trial because I'm a physician. I could do that. Now I can't for something that I invented. Well, anyway, it took a little while. And I remember I worked with Dr. Lyerly, who's a great colleague, a surgeon researcher at Duke. And he said, look, Andy, if you've invented something that is going to be viable, you don't need to be the person that kind of cradles this through. You don't have to be that person. It should be able to be done by any physician or clinician. If it truly is going to work, you don't need to be the person that has to walk this through every step of the way till it gets FDA approved. And in fact, it kind of frees you up to do other things, and so but that changed for me. I didn't have to be a Duke to participate in clinical trials. I could do it as a collaboration from afar. And in fact, I did in many of these cancer trials that I spoke about earlier. Now that happened, and then I was kind of like, I've been at Duke for 10 years. I'm one of the only DOs here. I'm teaching med students. I'm teaching residents and fellows, and I just felt like, I really want to give back to the osteopathic profession. So Michigan State at that time had been seeking a research investigator, and the Ohio Heritage Foundation, the Heritage Foundation out of Ohio set up an endowments at various DO schools to recruit additional faculty for various projects. And so Michigan State was looking for a researcher. And so this all came together for me. I was like, yeah, I want to go back to my alma mater. I'd love to teach at the med school, at the DO school. I teach at the MD school here as well. Have a laboratory, maybe have an increased capacity, which I did actually beyond what I had at Duke. So all that came together, and so I came back in 2005, and I've been here since.
And how was it that you eventually came to be involved with the academic leadership and then become Dean of Michigan State University, College of Osteopathic Medicine?
Yeah, I kind of ask myself that every morning. No, I don't. Well, as you go through the academic ranks, I became full professor, developed my lab. I have, assistant professors and postdocs, and then graduate students, trainees. There's a lot of delegation that goes on there, which frees up your time to allow you to pursue a variety of goals. And one of the things that Michigan State was interested in was trying to improve its ability to conduct translational research. This notion of taking things from the bench to an actual human, bench to bedside. And so there is an institute at MSU called the Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. And so as part of my role, I took that on as director to try and foster some improved capacity of MSU in general to conduct research in that type of space. So that, along with a number of other roles I have, I participate in administrative oversight of a large unit and budgets beyond my laboratory. And, people get to know you, and obviously I'm active in the college. And then 2018 actually is when the college needed a new dean. And that's when I was approached to potentially take on the role, primarily based on People knew me in the college. I was a sane entity. I don't know how to describe it, but folks knew that I love the place. I want to see it grow and thrive. And so the faculty and we have the college advisory committee came together, made a recommendation. I did the gauntlet interviews and provided a vision for the college. And eventually the faculty and college advisory committee, along with the provost at the time, thought it was a good idea if I take the reins. So that happened in 2018. It was a tumultuous time for the college. We were going through a lot of issues. Luckily, we've got a great faculty and staff and student body. I mean, everybody pulled together, and despite having a number of issues, we worked really hard to stabilize the climate, to stabilize the trajectory, and I feel like we're on pretty good footing going forward. We've got more applications here than ever. We've got 3 campuses now. The research is expanding. And so it's really been a fun ride to be able to sort of give back to a place that really allowed me to conduct all those wonderful things I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
That's a great story, and actually a perfect segue into my next question. For our pre-med listeners, could you please tell us what you think makes MSUcom so great? And, I want you to feel free to brag about why you should be a DO or DO PhD student at your school.
Yeah. Oh, well, obviously I'm biased, but first of all, I think being an osteopathic physician is the first focus. Whether you come upon it from day one or later, regardless of that, we want to see folks have evidence of an understanding of what the profession is and is not, and embrace that and experience it. And with that, they will come to understand that this is a great career trajectory if you want to truly preserve health and or treat illness. At Michigan State, the college was, I think, the 5th or 6th DO college opened in the nation back in 1969. And it was the first on a public university campus and a Big Ten campus for that matter. In fact, Michigan State is a top 70 research institution in the world. That helped solidify not only our med school, but I think the profession as well. That here we are, our osteopathic medical school is situated on this campus, sort of a great stamp of approval. And we were able, so because of that and the way the university is situated, even though we're a college, we get access to the entire university. I can reach out. I mean, literally, I can look out my window here, and there's an atomic super collider, right down the road. Or we've got, a Big Ten basketball campus, or, a vet school right across the railroad tracks here, a nursing college, college of engineering, you name it. And we get access to all that. And so our students can access that through our college. We're not siloed off. That's a tremendous advantage because now you get exposure to a variety of faculty with expertise across the disciplines. We have a physiology department, we have a micro department, we have a pharmacology department, we have a biochemistry department, we have a number of clinical departments, all populated with faculty that we engage fully in teaching our students. It's part of the deal. We'll support your department, but in turn, we want your best experts to come in and teach our students the state of the art of whatever question it is, nephrology or anatomy, radiology, derm, whatever it is. So we get to participate, and in fact, we share faculty across colleges, dual appointments, triple appointments, you name it. And so we can really leverage our resources here in a way that many other schools may not. And I think that provides for a really strong and robust first 2 years of our curriculum. Now, because we've been around for 52 years now, and Michigan is interesting because Michigan was a place where DOs were welcomed very early. Well, they thrived early. I wouldn't say welcome is a strong word. DOs had put up with a lot of discrimination professionally across the nation. Well, DOs came to Michigan and they even though they faced that, they were able to establish their own hospitals and networks. In fact, there were about 33 DO hospitals at one point, in the state of Michigan. And in fact, they established a number of residency programs in the surgical and medical specialties here in Michigan. And literally, I've talked with some of these folks that were in a meeting. Literally, you can imagine this smoke-filled basement room somewhere in the midst of Detroit, where the leaders from a number of these hospital systems and residency programs got together and said, "Hey, we should start a med school. We've got the capacity," and that's how MSU COM was started. Actually, every DO in the state of Michigan self-taxed themselves $2,000 to start our med school. People right out of med school back then, that's equivalent to about, well, with today's inflation, about 22 grand a piece. And they started the med school at that point, and it ended up at Michigan State for this very reason. Now the reason I went through that is because now, even though those hospitals are now part of, your larger systems, we still have access to those networks. And so our students, when they venture out to their clerkships, their third and fourth year, they have a variety to choose from across 22 sites. They could be rural, urban, suburban. You can kind of pick and choose, where you want to be. And you can sort of pick amongst different hospital systems. If there's one you're thinking about pediatrics, you can kind of gravitate towards that system that maybe has a greater strength there. Now, on top of that, we also have a statewide network of what's called our statewide campus system, in which we are affiliated with 40 different hospitals and systems for graduate medical education. There's actually 2,000 residents and fellows that are under that umbrella right now out of MSU COM in a variety of residencies, from surgical, pediatrics, internal medicine, family practice, across the state. And so many times you get access to those programs through our clerkships. So what I tell students that are interviewing with us is that you've already made a great choice in coming here, because there's a number of opportunities available to you when you get done with our med school, not only in residency, but I think 78% of our students that graduate end up staying in the state of Michigan to do a residency. And most are in that statewide campus system network. And in fact, there's 10,000 DOs licensed in the state of Michigan right now, and most of them are our alumni. So we've got this, even though it's called a peninsula, we're kind of an island in which this whole osteopathic infrastructure has been almost 1 in 4 doctors in the state are a DO. And so you're enmeshed in it at every level, and you can really feel that flavor of the profession permeating in aspects. So hopefully that made sense. That's why you should come to MSU.
Well, all I'm going to say is you're starting to make me wish I went to MSU.
Well, it's a great, there's a lot of great DO institutions. I'm really proud of the entire profession. Every med school has its strengths. We have weaknesses. Other places may have weaknesses. We have strengths. Other places have unique strengths. But I think overall we provide a well-rounded capacity, especially if you're kind of wondering, where do I fit in? Which I think is an important question. Pre-med is thinking about, you haven't quite worked out what your ultimate career goal is. Well, you want to be at a place that allows you multiple opportunities to learn about all the opportunities that are out there, so that you can make an informed decision once you do have to come to those those decision points, where you're going to choose a residency. You want to be able to make that as informed by experience as possible. I think that's a critical element that should be considered by anyone as they go into med school. Not just the rigor of the med school and all that, but also the opportunities that's afforded to you.
Can you tell us one thing about you that has made you successful, or put in a more fun way, what would you say is your superpower?
I actually question a lot of things all the time. And because of that questioning, I'm always seeking the correct answer. And I'm uneasy if I don't have that answer. I'm uncomfortable. I need data. I need facts. I need solid kind of info in order to feel comfortable moving forward. Now, I don't know if that's a superpower or not, because if you're in an emergency room and I don't have much data, I may not be the best physician for you, but if I have a little bit of time to think about it and get some data or get some info or ask some questions, I'm much better at that. So anyway, I think I'm just, that uneasiness actually allows me to really power through and think through questions and try to get a sophisticated answer, hopefully, that allows me to go to the next step. I don't know if that's a power or not, but it's kind of the way I operate.
It sounds to me like you have a natural predilection towards being an investigator.
I guess so, yeah. I've also got a sort of, well, I really think any problem can be overcome if you spend enough time thinking about it. You can easily just sort of like, yeah, it's a problem, and move on. And there's enough suffering in the world that if you can spend a little time and you've got the brains to contribute meaningfully, I think that's the other point of research is you got to put in that effort. But the outcome is, like I mentioned, you could potentially impact a lot of people, and that can be tremendously satisfying.
All right. And
Mm-hmm.
our final question. What was the best piece of advice that you received from someone else throughout your education or training that you want to pass on to our pre-meds and medical school students?
I've got a lot of advice, but one I heard was focus, and then focus, and then if I didn't mention it already, focus. There's so many shiny objects you can chase, right? In medicine in particular, there's, and eventually you're going to have to make a choice or, zero in on something, because otherwise you'll get overwhelmed real quick, and you might then all of a sudden lose capacity to really zero in on what you're truly seeking. So you need to focus. And if you want to be a physician, you need to focus on finding out whether this is truly for you. Okay, because I tell my piece of advice is that this is almost a calling. It's a passion you have to become a physician, because there's a lot of after hours work, unconventional work, stressful work. You're putting yourself in a position of sometimes very charged and very sad situations. I deliver a lot of bad news as a geneticist, actually, unfortunately, but I still get satisfaction because the patients are grateful that I at least have a capacity to do that. But you need to make sure that this is right for you. So focus in on those experiences that will tell you that. Go into the emergency room, go to a crisis center, go to an international sort of venue, and at the end of the day, you're like, this is still what I want to do, despite it all. Then we want you, and you'll know it for yourself, because you don't want to end up, what I tell you, you don't want to end up 20, 30 years down the road looking in the mirror going, why did I do this? Because that's not fair to you. It's not fair to those who seek you out for care. So that's why you really want to be informed and focus your efforts on making sure you're in the best place, because it's not only for your own well-being, preventing burnout and all that. It's also for the well-being of those who will be seeking you out down the road. They don't want to come in and see a grumpy doctor, who's thinking, I should have went into emergency room, or I should have been a geneticist, or I should have been this, or a researcher. You got to figure that out, and the best way is to focus. Find those things that you don't want to do quick, and move to those that seem more desirable.
Dr. Amalfitano, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your experience and wisdom with us. It really means a lot to us, especially all of us in this long and winding road that is medicine.
Yeah, it is, but at the same time, I got a few gray hairs now, and I still remember, going through med school and thinking, oh my gosh, so much time ahead of me, and then I got to do residency, and then I got to do fellowship maybe or whatever, and it seems just so far away. And now looking back on it, it looks, it feels like a blip. Okay, it goes by fast, and you will be there before you know it. So try and keep that in mind, that time is moving quickly for you, to take advantage of the situations you have now, because they're fleeting. But you will get to where you need to be in a matter of no time, and then you're going to have many, many, many years of just satisfaction because you've made the right choice. If you're here now, I can't think. I have no regrets at all, and I think many of my colleagues feel the same way. And there's few professions out there that allow you to sort of really look in the mirror and say, I'm sure glad I went this direction.
Yes, absolutely. Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
All right. Hey, listen, nice talking to you. Thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there is someone you want us to interview to doordonot@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Do or Do Not for updates. And if you like what we're doing, share our podcast with your friends, family, coworkers, and peers. Thank you so much for listening.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.